thank all of you for making time to be here with us this morning. I'd like to particularly thank John Mills and the entire team at Labour Future for all their support, which has been absolutely tremendous, and I think does show as well that Labour leavers and Labour remainers can certainly agree on one thing, which is we've got to not only address the issues around Brexit now in the short term, but also the causes of Brexit, and that is very much what this book is about. I'd also like to thank all of our brilliant chapter authors. I think you don't have all of them here today, but you've got a flavour of the amazing team I think we assembled with such a broad range of expertise and experience. One thing I think, even though we've all got different stories to tell, we are absolutely united in our belief in the need for a project of national renewal that needs to be designed and led by a whole nation Labour Party. So even though we're coming from different wings of the party, we are united in that view. Back in the dim and distant mists of late 2015, a few months after I became an MP, I published a pamphlet called A New Nation, Building a United Kingdom of Purpose, Patriotism and Resilience. I think about 10 people read it, including my mum, and a guy called Joe Jervis. So Joe got in touch, and we had one of the most interesting conversations that I've ever had about politics. It wasn't that we agreed on everything, because that's clearly never happened in the history of the Labour Party. But we did agree on a hell of a lot. We agreed that the Labour Party had fundamentally failed to reinvent itself since 1997. We agreed that the politics of the Liberal centre, which dominated the 97 to 2010 period, had failed to protect our communities from the whirlwind of globalisation that had ripped through our towns. We agreed that conspiracy theory-driven worldview of the hard left, which has been on the rise since 2015, is anathema to the realism and pragmatism that prevails on the doorsteps of the vast majority. We agreed that the true purpose of the Labour Party is to build a whole nation politics that is based on radical Keynesian economics and a patriotic worldview that is expressed through a strong sense of shared citizenship. And then we agreed to write a book. Well, here we are 2.5 years later, and Joe is still just about talking to me. Spirit of Britain and Purpose of Labour is our attempt to describe the dangerously polarised state of Britain as we see it in 2018, to set out the causes of the deep divisions that are holding us back, and to outline how we believe that the Labour Party must change if it is to heal the wounds and reunite our polarised country. And there can be no doubt that our country is more polarised than we have seen it at any time since the Second World War. Young versus old, city versus town, graduate versus non-graduate. These are the fault lines upon which our nation precariously stands. And these fault lines have created what we call a values chasm. On one side of the values chasm, we have the cosmopolitan tribe, typically university educated, urban, highly mobile and confident in the modern globalized world. And on the other, we have the communitarians, often non-graduates who value familiarity, security and community, and who have typically experienced the profound economic, social and cultural changes of the last 40 years as loss. Whilst the referendum did not create these two tribes, it certainly sharpened and deepened the divisions that lie between them. Those who voted leave come predominantly from the second group, the communitarians. These are typically families who have bitter experience of the damage that globalization has inflicted on their communities and high streets, who often worry that they will struggle to cope with the relentless churn of the 21st century labour market. There is nothing new in any of this. The plight of communitarian communities has been plain to see for decades. I'm MP for Aberavon in South Wales, home to the Port Talbot Steelworks. The people of Port Talbot therefore know better than most about the importance of frictionless trade in industrial goods with the EU, but they still voted for Brexit. And I'll tell you why. Because for decades they've watched the heart being ripped out of our manufacturing industries, and with it the fabric and identities of the towns and communities that have grown up around those industries. Because whenever the people of those towns and communities spoke out, they were largely ignored by mainstream politicians, who seemed to be intent only on promoting their own cosmopolitan values and interests, who told them that nothing could be done about their jobs moving abroad because globalization is an unstoppable force of nature. and because whenever they raised concerns about the impact of immigration on their communities, they were told they were bigots or racists. Now let's be clear. These are proud, resilient people. They're not looking for special treatment or for anyone's charity. What they are looking for is a level playing field, an opportunity to compete without having one hand tied behind their backs. For decades, they watched helplessly as investment, wealth, resources and talent were sucked out of the industrial heartlands of Wales, the Midlands and the North, and into London and the South East, out of manufacturing and into financial services. And they rightly wondered why successive governments stood by and allowed that to happen. Labour achieved some great things, from the minimum wage to Sure Start to peace in Northern Ireland. But defeatism in the face of what globalisation was doing to local communities took the party away from one of our core objectives, to help those who are most insecure to succeed in the modern world. Then, so much of the good work that had been done by successive Labour governments was undone by the Conservatives from 2010 onwards. On their watch, social mobility has gone backwards, poverty has increased, and austerity continues to cripple our public services. Now, many of you, like me, will feel that this has nothing to do with the European Union. The UK's economic model was not broken by Brussels. It was broken by Westminster. And you'd be absolutely right. We actually need more international cooperation if we're to take on the rootless supranational corporates whose tax dodging and monopolistic behaviour are the unacceptable face of globalisation. And Germany's membership of the EU has never stopped it from having an active industrial strategy and a balanced growth model. But having been largely ignored by mainstream politicians for so long, and in the absence of a compelling alternative political vision, millions of British voters saw the 2016 referendum as an unmissable opportunity to vent their anger and frustration against the establishment. The communitarian backlash that drove the Leave vote in 2016 was further entrenched by the 2017 general election. Our success in June 2017 was in the most part due to our ability to win over all the groups who tend to include high numbers of cosmopolitans. 49% of graduates backed us, as did every age group under 50. And it was, of course, a huge cause for celebration that we won in cosmopolitan hotspots such as Kensington and Canterbury. But we struggled amongst those who left school at 16, the over 50s, and lost to the Tories in seats such as Mansfield and Middlesbrough in our communitarian heartlands. In the face of this polarisation, the challenge for Labour politicians is now twofold. First, we must help to secure a Brexit deal that can reunite our deeply divided nation. And second, we must see the Brexit vote and the 2017 general election as a wake-up call, an opportunity to return to the first principles of our core purpose as a party, and to shape a plan for the common good on that basis. It is this second challenge which forms the primary focus of our book, but clearly the two are intrinsically linked. Because if this Parliament gets Brexit wrong, and we suffer a severe economic contraction as a consequence, then it is clear that our best laid plans for government will rapidly become undeliverable. For the best part of 2 years now, I've been arguing that an EEA-based Brexit is the only viable option for the following reasons. Firstly, it would reflect the mandate the referendum produced. A narrow victory for Leave is a mandate to leave the political framework of the EU whilst remaining in the economic one. Secondly, it would help us to address the concerns about free movement of labour that drove so many to vote Leave, as Articles 112 and 113 of the EEA Agreement enable the unilateral suspension and reform of any one of the 4 freedoms that underpin the single market. Thirdly, the UK would have an influential voice in the shaping of EU regulations, directives and policies through the well-established institutional structures of the EEA. Fourthly, and perhaps most compellingly given the utterly shambolic and incompetent manner in which this government is conducting the negotiations, is that the EEA actually exists. It was created in 1993, and it's a model that governments and businesses throughout the EU have come to understand and value. With the risk of a catastrophic no-deal Brexit now looming larger than ever, it's high time that both the government and opposition face up to the reality and commit to the only form of Brexit that has a serious chance of being able to heal the wounds, break the impasse, and reunite our deeply divided country. But as I say, this book looks beyond Brexit and at how the Labour Party can continue to deliver as the greatest force for good in the history of British politics. And we still remain the most powerful vehicle for change that our country has. Only Labour can bridge the divides, fix our economy, and restore the spirit of Britain. I've already mentioned how we're losing touch with the very people that we were founded to represent. But this isn't just about winning elections. It is Labour's moral duty to understand and represent the values and interests of communitarians, who are so often the most exposed to the winds of change and to the sharp end of the job market. In our book, we set out the 6 seismic shifts that Labour must make if we're to be what we describe as a whole-nation party once again. First, we must recognise and make clear that common bonds are just as important as diversity. Second, we must be the party of social responsibilities, just as we are the party of individual rights. Third, we must understand that social mobility is important, but is not sufficient when sometimes it leads to entire communities being left behind. Is our 2017 manifesto pledge on tuition fees really the right thing to do if our top priority is to support the so-called forgotten 50% who don't go to university? Fourth, we must work with business to build a new kind of growth. Fifth, we must see immigration as a market dynamic that must be managed. And sixth, we must be the party of progressive patriotism. And it is perhaps that last seismic shift that is the most important. In my view, the reason that we're not 20 points ahead of the Tories in the opinion polls now is because millions of communitarians across the length and breadth of our country have no truck whatsoever with the conspiracy theory-driven worldview of the hard left. Communitarians recognise that successive governments have made serious errors of judgment in their conduct of foreign policy, but they are fundamentally proud to be British. Yet when they look at the hard left of the Labour Party, they see a group of people who see our country exclusively as a source of oppression, imperialism, and colonialism. They see a group of people who believe that NATO is nothing but a warmongering junta. A group of people who believe that Washington, Tel Aviv, and Brussels are the root of all evil, and that the global economy is run by a shady cabal of Jewish financiers. A group of people who subscribe to the "my enemy's enemy is my friend" school of thought, which leads them to support any regime that challenges the West, regardless of that regime's values, motives, or actions. Communitarians are outraged by the hard left's foot-dragging reluctance to condemn Russia for the Salisbury attacks, and by an apparent tendency to give greater credence to the propaganda of Russia today than they do to the intelligence-gathering capabilities of our own security services. In short, communitarians have come to the conclusion that the hard left of the Labour Party doesn't actually believe in Britain. If that continues to be the case, and if a consensus emerges that the hard left's worldview has become the prevailing worldview of the Labour Party as a whole, then it will never be possible for us to become a whole-nation party, and we will never win another general election. Instead, we'll simply become a Marmite, love us or hate us party, wildly popular amongst that narrow section of the population that subscribe to these ultra-left dogmas, and irrelevant to just about everyone else. Ladies and gentlemen, Britain is not only polarised, it is also paralysed. Our entire political system has fought itself to a standstill over Brexit. The government is in disarray, and Parliament is stuck in stalemate. And this is because polarisation always leads to paralysis. The more tribal our country, the more fractured our politics, and the more frozen our democracy becomes. The central aim of this book is therefore to make a contribution to the debate about how Labour can break the impasse by healing the divides and reuniting our communities, by rediscovering the spirit of Britain. Week in and week out in my Aberavon constituency, I meet with public sector workers who are powering on in the face of Tory austerity. I speak to older people doing their best to navigate an underfunded care system. Every time I visit the Port Talbot Steelworks, I see a workforce resilient in the face of the winds of globalisation and the onward march of technology. At schools and colleges, I meet young women and men preparing themselves for a life of precarious jobs and spiralling costs. and I see proud people rooted in their communities and in their values, 100% committed to doing the very best they can for themselves and for their families. Tough and resilient, yes, but also warm and generous to a fault. And with people like that, the sky is the limit. But for far too long, communities like Aberavon across the length and breadth of our country have been competing with one hand tied behind their backs. They've been let down and they've been ignored. Well, this has to stop. It's time for Labour to restore the spirit of Britain by unlocking the huge potential of our people. I hope this book will make a small but meaningful contribution to making that happen, and I hope you enjoy reading it. Thank you.